What does the Chief Experience Officer do? What is the U.S. Department of the Air Force's user experience strategy, and how does it measure and manage it? And what are some of the most significant challenges facing improving customer experience within the U.S. Department of the Air Force? I'll explore these questions and so much more with my very special guest, Colt Whittall, Chief Experience Officer within the U.S. Department of the Air Force. I'd love to understand your role within the U.S. Department of the Air Force, and that is, what are the responsibilities and duties for the Chief Experience Officer? And can you highlight some of the things that are under your portfolio?
Sure. So when we created the role, and I was involved in drafting the position description originally, we focused on a few main things. First was just being a strategic advisor and communicator regarding matters related to user experience, because we didn't have that. Second was to work with the CIO organization and the whole communications, comms ecosystem to improve user experience of enterprise IT, which when you talk about enterprise IT, it's mainly about three things: performance, reliability and resilience, and kind of the support that goes along with that. And I would probably even add a fourth thing, which is just the general interaction of it, because it can get clunky sometimes, particularly due to security things. So there's that. That's kind of the second aspect. Another aspect is to work with the application, the software community. So one thing I haven't talked about yet is, my job as I'm working for the CIO, I probably spend 2/3, maybe 3/4 of my time focused on enterprise IT. Most people would think of UX more as software and applications, but that is part of my job too. And so since we have literally thousands of applications in the Air Force, certainly well over 1,000, thousands maybe an overstatement, but well over 1,000, we got a lot of them. So I can't go out and individually work with each one. That would be impossible. But part of my job is to help put things in place that try to raise the bar of user experience across that entire massive portfolio. And it's really, to be honest, it's multiple portfolios. There's, the personnel portfolio, or A1. There's the FM portfolio, or financial management. There's the logistics portfolio, A4. We really have multiple portfolios. The idea is to help raise the bar across all of that. And then the last thing that we put in the position description that is broad. There are certain, well, I call them the mega user journeys. And what that is, those are these kind of user journeys that just cross the entire Air Force practically, or at least a huge swath of it. And so one of the ones that I focused on, and really the two big ones that I focused on really are PCSing, or permanent change of station, which is an aggravation for pretty much anyone who ever served in uniform, and civilians too can PCS. And the second one is readiness. I regret to say we haven't yet made tons of progress in either one of those, but we've given it a solid shot and continue to do so. That's the role.
That's great. And, I was wondering, Colt, as a follow-up to sort of describing the role, how does your work and the focus on user experience and user interface support the overall mission of the U.S. Department of the Air Force's CIO shop and the department in general?
Well, there are several ways. I'll start first with one way that it doesn't. I occasionally get people, say things like, well, wait a minute, why do we need a chief experience officer, right? We're not, this is the Air Force, for crying out loud. And I couldn't agree more, actually. It sounds a little strange, but what I have to remind people, and this is part of my strategic communications, part of the role, is this is not about, we're not selling, airline tickets and vacations and cruises and movies and video games. This is not that stuff. I am not here. I gave an interview one time, you can still find if you go look for it, where I said, my objective is not to delight my users. And it's not, but I would back that up and say, wait a minute, if all of this technology performs and helps people do their mission better, up to their level of expectations, and be their best selves in their role in the mission, they will not be delighted. They will be absolutely ecstatic. And then for about a week, they'll be that, and then it'll become the expectation, and that'll be the new norm, and we'll move on, and they'll keep doing it, and we'll get benefits. So what are we really trying to do for the mission? Practically every job in the Department of the Air Force is enabled by technology in some way. The business side of it certainly is. The mission side of it certainly is. Almost every job is enabled. Even if you don't interact with a computer all the time, it's still computing processes that support a big chunk of what you do. So somebody else is probably doing something with it related to, on your behalf. So if that technology is, takes 20, 30 minutes to boot up in the morning, if it's unreliable, if it causes people to lose a day's work or a half a day's work, if you have to wait for 2, 3, 4 weeks to get it provisioned, and in the course of that, you have to go borrow somebody else's machine, and that doesn't enable you to get organized in your new job. If you can't, if systems are just slow and buggy and take a long time to get something done, most young airmen today come in, they're already experts in technology, right? IT is like the air they breathe, right? And so, they, I think, rightfully get a certain amount of frustration if they can't fairly quickly figure something out. I think they expect they need to learn their job. They need to learn, how to maintain an airplane or do whatever their job is. But I generally don't think they expect to have to come in and, fight through really weird stuff in a fairly basic application to like get somebody decorations or rewards or something like that. So all of these things are, on the one hand, they amount to aggravations, but they do cause loss of productivity. And that's actually lost productivity due to IT is something we actually now track. We can talk more about it later. So it's about productivity. It's about meeting expectations. So, we had the Fix My Computer memo from Michael Kanan, came out about 18 months or so. And it pointed out something I think that's very important. It pointed out that, wait a minute, we go out and we recruit young airmen. We are the biggest, most lethal, most sophisticated Air Force and Space Force on the planet. And then there's this giant disconnect between some of the technology that they use every day to accomplish seemingly fairly simple things, sometimes very sophisticated things, but often very simple things. They see that disconnect, and it doesn't really make one feel good about our ability to do the big things, right? So we need to close that disconnect. When you can't deliver on some of these small things, it doesn't make you feel real good about the big things. So there's productivity, there's actual mission effects, and then I think there's this general kind of, call it, brand disconnect that I think is very negative in a number of ways, right? And it potentially could turn out and be negative for recruiting or retention. I don't have any data to suggest that it is, but it is possible.
I'm wondering, within the context of the Air Force's IT strategy, can you elaborate on the department's user experience strategy and its outside-in approach? And what are some of your key priorities in this area?
Sure. So here's the funny thing. You don't see user experience mentioned much in our IT strategy. If you look at the SAF-CN strategy, which is on our website, there's not a lot of mentions of it. But we do want results, right? The whole reason why we're doing this is results and outcomes. And so sometimes on slides, you'll see me where my title is. It says Chief Experience Officer, and I cross out the experience and write in outcomes. So I think our CX, I do have a CX strategy. I didn't actually want to write one, but we kind of needed one to be able to communicate it. And you can actually go find it on Medium. It's about a page and a half white paper, maybe 2 pages. So it's a very simple thing. It's not a big strategy document, but really what it is, at the end of the day, it's focused on leverage points. But fundamentally, the concept is every big area of our IT strategy, really at the end of the day, is looking for outcomes. And so the CX strategy, or the user experience strategy, is really focused on outcomes. And the idea is, let's treat airmen as customers. Let's treat ourselves almost like we're a big IT services company that's serving consumers. Let's operate a little bit that way. Let's measure user experience from our customer perspective, so our airman perspective, which is sometimes easy and sometimes hard to do, depending on what you're measuring. Then let's track that over time and manage the service levels. I mean, fundamentally, that's the strategy. And if you go do some research on, in the analyst websites, the Gartner, Forrester, all that kind of stuff, they describe that as an outside-in approach. So in other words, IT, stop focusing so much. You have to focus on the stuff, right? You got to focus on the network and uptime and links and all the stuff that we do. But The concept of an outside in strategy is if the outcome I'm getting, like if the performance of all the key applications and the reliability of all the key applications at the edge, right? So right there at the glass when you're using, if all of those metrics are good, then you're doing a pretty good job, and you're delivering, right? You're getting the outcome that you want. So that's the idea of an outcome, an outside in approach. And it makes complete sense. And it also applies when you consider things like tech refresh. Sometimes I think when we talk about tech refresh, we look at tech debt and we say, well, what's the old stuff, in the network, or the old stuff in the data center, or whatever, right? And then we say, well, whatever's oldest, we must have to replace that, go spend money there. And that may be right. All right. It could get to the right answer, but I would approach it a little differently. I would say, okay, well, from an outside in perspective, here are the specific bases or applications or computers or whatever that are getting bad outcomes, that the performance data looks horrible, and let's go fix them and deal with that first. And sometimes that means you do something at the edge, like replace computers. Sometimes it means you might need to do something in the network or the base boundary or with the routers or with the data center. But focus on the outcomes that you're measuring at the edge and try to drive those results. That's the outside in strategy.
That's great. And, you've mentioned a couple of times, Colt, the idea of measuring user experience. And I'm wondering if you can elaborate a little bit more. How do you exactly do the measurement and management of it? And what are some of the tools you use in achieving this?
Sure. Yeah. So it's still early. I would say out of the three things I'm going to talk about, two are definitely still kind of, really sort of in pilot still. So the first is just ask airmen. And so, like I said, let's treat airmen as customers. So let's put in place basically a voice of the customer strategy, which is a fairly common, customer experience technique. So when I first took this job, I had in mind, I wanted some kind of a voice of the customer program, but I wasn't sure how I was going to do it. Do I have to go out and buy a survey platform? What am I have to do? And I found out within a few days that we have this organization called the Air Force Survey Office, and they already have a contract with one of the largest experience management platforms. Basically, it's a giant survey and research tool, and it's already under an authority to operate, or ATO. Everything's already there. So I literally just approached them and said, hey, what I would like to do is I would like to survey a small percentage of airmen. Originally, it was every day, then it was every week. Now we're doing it every month. And we're asking them three main questions. The first is, where primarily do you work? And it's everywhere from 100% telecommute to 100% on base. And then the second question is, overall, what is your satisfaction with Air Force or Department of the Air Force IT, including computers, networks, devices, and support? The third question is, what is the primary reason for your response? And we get about a 6% plus or minus response rate, which is good for something like this. It actually is. Like in the commercial world, you'd probably be happy to have 1%. So, I'm quite happy with this. And it's actually been higher at various points, but we get a tremendous amount of data. And then we have other optional questions, which we can talk more about, that address other things. So we did that. So thing one, voice of the customer. And that's been tremendously helpful. Second thing is we needed digital experience monitoring because we needed to know what kind of performance we were getting from the key client applications running on our computers. And so I knew kind of what we needed to do. We had one of these tools in, I would say, very limited use. So we were able to use some COVID-19 supplemental funds to ramp that up and cover about 1% of our computers across. I think we started out with about, I want to say, 70 bases or so. And so that gave us some visibility. We started that a little over 2 years ago, and that was very, very helpful. Now we can track for key applications, like let's take Microsoft Outlook. We can track average response time of Outlook over, say, a 7-day period and, save that. And now we have a snapshot of how that was performing. And that's critical because then we can compare that across bases. We can compare it over time. If you don't have something like that, how do you know if you're getting better or worse? You really don't. And so absolutely critical. So we've got, charts out the wazoo of here's how we compare to where we were then, and we can drill down in on all of that. It's, so that we got that. By the way, this also tracks things like boot up time and all sorts of other metrics, and it associates it with the specs of the hardware, so we can correlate what kind of performance we're getting, with all different types of hardware in our systems, that kind of thing. And then since then, we've scaled that up. So we're now on about 5% of computers on NIPRNet. And we've received funding through DoD CAPE to actually make this an ongoing thing out into the future, and through the POM, which is basically how we fund stuff in DoD. And so this is going to be an ongoing thing. And then the third thing is NetScout. It's basically a network monitoring tool. And we're on 70-something bases. I want to say 77. We put 2 on NIPR and 2, well, not everyone is on SIPR, but 2 on the secret network, 2 on the N-class network. And what we're doing there is, even though it doesn't measure the completely outside in, it does measure the wide area network services that we provide to the base. And that's important because, if we know that things are slow at a base, now we can tell, immediately, real time, is it because say the public key encryption, infrastructure is kind of bogged down or something related to that, or is it a routing change, or is it just a link type of thing? And then we have a better comprehension of that. So we have other organizations, the Network Operations Center and that kind of thing, that are managing, call it, layers 1 through 4 in the OSI model. So think all of the infrastructure layers. What we're trying to do is track these higher levels that directly affect the user experience. So those are the 3 big tools that we added. And like I said, we've got it funded now to continue that, out into the future.
Tell us, how challenging is it to improve CX in an organization like the U.S. Department of the Air Force? And what are some of the things organizationally or enterprise you're facing in doing that?
So I don't have a big staff. I think what I do is I try to find allies that have a similar vision and passion and the right skills, and then we just start moving together. And that's kind of the nature of being an HQE appointee. I mean, legally, I don't think we can actually manage staff, right? Which on some level frees me from a lot of things. Whenever my peers are doing, dozens and dozens of performance reviews, I don't have to worry about it that much. I just provide feedback on people. And so I have to go out and kind of build alliances and keep things moving. So that's a challenge. But keep in mind, I'm a professional consultant. So that's kind of the environment that I learned to operate in, for the first part of my career. So I don't mind that. I think the other one that's tough is just the nature of the annual funding cycle. So you identify a need, and it's clear it's a need. You can build a solid business case for it. Well, getting from that point that you have a solid business case for something to actually getting it funded sort of in the regular process, even if you're going around kind of, going through like the unfunded request or UFR process, getting to that point is very hard, very time consuming, takes most of the time more than a year. Then you've got it in the POM, and then you're probably waiting for another year before it takes effect. So if you're in a military organization, people are moving, in and out of your organization. It's just difficult to maintain over the course of a couple of years when you're trying to get something done, and it requires, to go buy something, whether it's people or products or whatever. And you got a 2-year process to go get funding for something. And 2 years is kind of how long people tend to stay in your organization. Keeping all of that moving forward, very difficult.
What advice would you give other organizations within the federal government, whether it's federal, civilian, or within the defense area, who are looking to begin or further develop their own formal user experience programs?
So I would approach it in a similar way. I think outside in is the way to do it. I think data is the way to do it. And I think you have to back that up. We haven't talked about all of these different pieces of this, but there's other pieces to it. Their policy can help. I think a lot of times people start with policy, but I think policy can help because you can require, owners of applications to collect web analytics. You can require them to collect user feedback. You can require them to use a user-centered design process. You can require them to use a design system. We haven't talked about that, but we're getting ready to launch something there too. And so there's certain things that policy can do. So I think, you got to think about that. The other thing I would say is tools are a big deal because the typical tools that help people deliver a good user experience in the commercial sector, most of those tools are not really available much in DoD because of security reasons and other things. So basic web analytics, I mentioned, if you go open almost any private business, you're going to get web analytics, from somewhere. There's multiple products. They don't cost very much money, maybe $100, $200 a month. You put some tags in your website and it'll track how many people come and where they come from and all kinds of things, right? Performance, availability, uptime, whatever. And so we haven't had those tools available to us. So they don't cost a lot of money. So focus on making those tools available. And we've done some of that. We now have an open source web analytics tool stood up on Cloud One. We have about 21 applications in process of tagging for it. Those kinds of things I would do. Enable them with tools, back it up with some policy that helps kind of get things going, and then put in place, the platforms that give you data so that you get that kind of outside in and customer-centric view. Those would be the big things I would do.
This has been the Business of Government Hour, a conversation with Colt Whittall, Chief Experience Officer within the U.S. Department of the Air Force. Be sure to join us next time for another informative, insightful, and in-depth conversation on improving government technology and its effectiveness. Until then, subscribe, download, and listen to the entire interview at iTunes, Spotify, or on your favorite podcast app, and as always at businessofgovernment.org.